Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
Thursday morning, we are less than 2 weeks from Election Day, and I don't know about you. I feel like we've already forgotten about Brett Kavanaugh. The Kavanaugh bump was supposed to carry Republicans to the midterms, and maybe they're going to have a better than expected midterms. Like, I'm not saying that, but I don't think Kavanaugh is going to be tip of our tongue on Election Day at this point.
No, I agree. I think there's at least three huge stories that have happened since then. You've got the is it Khashoggi, who was murdered by the Saudis. You've got the caravan hurdle. Well, I don't say hurdling. They're going about 20 miles a day, but the caravan heading to the border, and then you've got the bombing attempts yesterday, Wednesday. Three huge news stories, and I'm sure there have been dozens of other stories that have also knocked it off the front page. Yeah, I agree, Bill. It feels like a year ago that Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed.
And I don't even know if the three stories you just mentioned, are they going to be top of mind 12 days from now, because we are in such a nonstop.
The good news for Trump is the caravan will continue, and it will not make it won't make it to the border. So that story, certainly Fox News will be able to keep showing video.
Well, I would expect Trump's going to work caravan into as much as he can. But, just yesterday, how much coverage was about the bomb packages, and then how much was about the caravan? There's only so much you can control.
Right. No, I agree. One would hope that every day is not like yesterday, that every day in the next 2 weeks. It's funny, as a columnist, at the Beast, we have a call on Mondays, and this week I felt really good because I sort of planned, Monday we're going to write about Trump going to Texas with Ted Cruz. That feels like 2 weeks ago. And then I was like, then I had an idea, Thursday's a writing day, and my column on Friday will be about the midterms. And a certain angle I can't disclose because I'm still going to use it probably. And then, of course, there's no way that you're going to actually stick to the plan of that. You could be proactive. I don't want to complain about the fact that my writing schedule got, messed up, because that's like the least of even my concerns. But it is in the olden days, just for those who don't know, like, you used to sort of be able to do that in the olden days, and every once in a while something would pop. Now it is, again, we are probably in danger of whatever we talk about today will be overshadowed or overtaken by events.
So I saw in the Washington Post this morning an article, Democrats worried in districts with high Hispanic electorates. There's not the same sense of urgency in, say, electorates with college-educated white people. And so there are certain districts that are in play that maybe they thought wouldn't be in play, but other districts that they're really excited about seem like they're going to be tougher roads. And, of course, the Senate map is not looking great for Democrats. So it's sort of a general Democrats worried it's not going to be as good a midterm as they thought it was going to be.
I've talked to strategists and pollsters, Bill. I think we probably talked about this before, but I've talked to Republican pollsters and strategists, and they find it super interesting that, like, minorities don't have a big problem with Trump. Like, Trump probably did better than Mitt Romney amongst Hispanics, I think. I don't want to. Anyway, my point is, it's the college-educated, single or white woman that is the most anti-Trump. And I think the Kavanaugh story, I understand where they were coming from. That really fed into that demographic, whereas the caravan doesn't.
I don't want to get too far ahead of what we actually know. This is all very anecdotal at this point, so we'll see what actually happens on Election Day. But if there is a inability for Democrats to get Latino votes to increase, particularly in places like Texas, Florida, California, I think the nuances of each state vary. there's not the same Cuban population, for example, in Texas and California as there is in Florida. That's going to be something to analyze. I did a piece of Politico this week called the 15 races that will determine how Democrats approach 2020. I did not get into that Hispanic question, the Latino question. I don't think there is, just one race to kind of pinpoint on that question. I was trying to do as much, singular races as I could. But it is something to watch. How well do Democrats do? And Beto O'Rourke is sort of the exhibit A on that. I did talk about how Andrew Gillum, Stacey Abrams, Beto O'Rourke, they are the three examples of Southern Democrats trying to win with liberal progressive messaging to build a multiracial coalition that galvanizes the base, which is not how you would normally think Democrats would win in the South. So I did talk about that in the most generic terms. But there's certainly some House races where how well the Latino vote shows up will determine how well Democrats do.
Well, I wrote about Ted Cruz earlier in the week, and I think Beto needs like 67% of Hispanic turnout. I guess I assume it's registered voters, and he's at he's winning like 60%. He needs to win like 67% of the Hispanic vote. Well, I guess it's estimated turnout.
That's one way you could slice the numbers, but again, Texas has a pretty high percentage of college-educated whites. It's different than other southern states on that score. There's one model would be juice that Latino vote in Texas. There's a whole lot of Latinos there, and they aren't necessarily registered to vote. There's a project has been how do we get these people registered and to the polls on election day. But perhaps there's a larger chunk of the college-educated white vote that O'Rourke's going to get. That's one of the reasons why Hillary did as well as she did in Texas relative to Obama. We'll the different paths. We'll see how Beto actually tries to put that together.
Nothing would surprise me. You know what I mean? Like there's some NRSC, which I throw that out there as I'm skeptical, but David Drucker over at the Washington Examiner wrote about this NRSC poll that showed that Patrick Morrisey is winning over Joe Manchin in West Virginia. If Patrick Morrisey and Beto O'Rourke both won, I would be surprised, but I wouldn't be it wouldn't blow my mind. You know what I mean? If something like that happened, I'd be like, welcome to 2018,
They're two very different candidates.
Totally. I'm just saying, the Republican that nobody thinks is going to win and the Democrat that currently, Beto O'Rourke at one point, I think people thought he had a shot. I did. I always thought it was a long shot, but a shot, and now I think he's essentially being written off.
Right. But most polls show Manchin winning, if have for a while. But you have a class of Democrat that is, in the case of Manchin, Joe Donnelly, Heidi Heitkamp, John Tester, Claire, to lesser extent Clara McCaskill. They're all running as products of their states. That they're trying to run local campaigns, not to nationalize things, not making things about Trump, and Beto O'Rourke. I don't think he's Trump all the time, but he did say we should impeach Trump, which is, he is definitely being more mindful of the base in Texas than he is about the swing. I think he has certain swingy messages. He just talked about being bipartisan and healing and that kind of stuff. But there's lots of red meat for the base in Beto O'Rourke's campaign, much more so than in those other incumbent Senate Democrat races, and in races like Tennessee, Phil Bredesen and Kyrsten Sinema in Arizona. They're running much more centrist, independent, bipartisan problem solver campaigns. And of course, there's a difference between Sinema and Bredesen in that Sinema has to answer for her left-wing past in a way that Bredesen doesn't. But they're still both trying to hew to the center. And so maybe all these candidates win, or maybe none of them win. But if a certain brand wins and a certain one doesn't, that's very much going to determine how Democrats interpret the election.
Imagine trying to run a local race and trying to keep it from being nationalized in this environment?
Well, I mean,
that's got to be virtually impossible.
Well, I mean, based on polling, Manchin's certainly doing it. There's a good chance that Tester is doing it. Now, those are people, and Bredesen has had better polling than he has as of late, but he still got a shot. Those three are people who have had long histories of being locally minded, state minded Democrats. They have records, they have brands. They're not just showing up out of nowhere and doing it.
See, I would argue that they're in the case of Manchin, at least. I'm not as familiar with Montana, but in the case of Manchin, at least, and West Virginia, I don't think his secret. I mean, this is like a matter of like semantics almost, or parsing, but like I don't think it's so much that he's been able to focus on local issues like, we're going to build this bridge and we're going to fix the, whatever. The James Rumsey Bridge is finally going to get repaired. Like, I don't think it's Manchin focusing on local issues. I think it's that he's not seen as a Democrat. Like, it's like the Claire McCaskill commercial, which was like, she's not one of those crazy Democrats. I think that's literally what people in West Virginia think of Manchin. Like, in other words, when the story's national, it doesn't hurt him. He's not inherently harmed by stories becoming national because he's seen as being on the same page as Trump.
Well, the famous ad that he ran back in 2010 was when he takes a seeming copy of the cap and trade bill, tacks it to a tree, and shoots it.
Right.
So it's a twofer. You're showing I'm not with the Democrats on climate change, and I love my gun in 1 second. Now he has an ad in this campaign where he takes the Republican healthcare bill and he shoots it. So he is still saying he loves his gun. And remember, he was the one who tried to enact a background check bill after Sandy Hook, the Manchin-Toomey bill. So he had already shown that he was willing to break ranks with the NRA. And he's not necessarily walking away from that, but he's trying to say, this is the moderate Joe Manchin. I'm going to try to solve problems, but I'm not hateful of those of us who own weapons. And while I break with Democrats when I think it's right, if this bill is going to hurt West Virginia, I'm going to be against it. That's always the tagline. He says it's all about West Virginia. That's his tagline.
Yeah.
Tester is someone who you always see him on his tractor. He's willing to show you all the fingers he lost in the combine accident, whatever, some farm equipment he got his hand caught into when he was a kid. He has an ad where he talks about the 10 bills that he worked with Donald Trump on getting to pass, and he's counting them, and he goes, "Oh, I'm right out of fingers." So again, a twofer. I work with Trump. I'm a local farm boy. I know I know the troubleshoot relations of farm life. That's the kind of thing Tester's always done. Trump's trying to upend that by saying, "Hey, he screwed over my VA pick in Ronnie Jackson." But considering that Ronnie Jackson did withdraw his candidacy, and even Trump said it in this recent Montana rally, maybe he wasn't so qualified. That's it's hard to knock Tester as being reflexively anti-Trump when he has other things that he can say.
Yep, absolutely. And so, I think that's one of the big, we may end up looking back and seeing like who, the candidates who had the positioning and the skill to navigate either keeping it local or surviving when it goes national. And I think they're the ones who survive, And
with Manchin and Tester, Manchin gets more guff than Tester because he veers right more. But I think most Democrats would say, look, they're just doing what they have to do. And they don't do a lot of active antagonism of the base. They don't take pot shots at the left very often because they know the base still exists in their states. They need those people to show up. So you mentioned Claire McCaskill got this radio ad where she says she's not one of those crazy Democrats. That's a little bit of that kind of, Sister Soldier elbowing. But she doesn't do a lot of that because, again, she needs that base to show, she needs a big, robust turnout in that St. Louis area and the Kansas City area. Now, Joe Donnelly, this is what I mentioned in my Politico article. Joe Donnelly is doing much more of a classic kick the left to win the center. He has two prominent TV ads where it starts like a Republican ad. There's the unruly left-wing protests, the ominous narrator in tone, socialists want a government takeover of our health care. And then Sonny Donnelly shows up, over my dead body. And there's the second ad that's come out that people have noted that it has a remarkable resemblance to Jonah Ryan in Veep, where he's out in the woods chopping wood. But the Donnelly ad says, the liberal left wants to chop this defense spending. No way! And he chops the stump with his axe himself. So, he is pointedly separating himself from the left. And many people on the left look at that in horror, saying, look, that is the Clintonian triangulation of old. The left's not going to stand for it. You need them to show up in big numbers, and telling them that they can go take a walk is not going to do it. Now, I can't say whether it's going to work or not, but it's a big test case whether, if you're going to run in a red state, does that still work in a Senate campaign or a gubernatorial campaign? And if it does, how does that inform the presidential candidates?
I just think it's so interesting how much of this is like, we talked about this before, but like persona and symbolism. I mean, if Joe Manchin looked like John Ossoff, it wouldn't matter how he voted. You know what I'm saying? Like, Joe Manchin looks like a dude from West Virginia who could kick your ass if he needs to.
Well, even more so, Richard Ojeda. I don't know if you're following that race in West Virginia 3. He is, I believe, the only Trump Democrat. He is a Trump voter running in a House race, and he is not reflexively pro-Trump. He's actually been critical of Trump about some things in the past year, but he is the fiery populist. He's out. He has an ad where he's just looking at the camera and saying, they say I'm angry. You bet I'm angry. Here's why I'm so angry. And he's taking shots at both Pelosi and McConnell, and taking shots at his opponent. There's I don't know if you follow the House Talk podcast, but there's a Republican and a Democratic strategist that co-host that podcast, and they've been talking midterms this whole time. And they're playing. Most political consultants would say, don't have your candidate deliver the negative. You save that for the narrator, save that for the testimonial, keep the candidate above the fray. Richard Ojeda completely rejects that. He's going to do it himself. He's showing how tough he is and what a fighter he is.
Yeah. Now, all the old rules are being rewritten right now.
And he might not win. So I'm not saying this is proven to be the way to go, but you have races like that, and you have races where Democrats are running, forthrightly on single payer. And I think the ones in red areas that are most notable are Kara Eastman in Nebraska 2. Now I'm going to forget the other two. But if you look at my article, they're there. But there are races like that where if Democrats win there, you're going to say, wow, single payer won. The number of single payer candidates on swing districts that Clinton won, and that's not nothing if they win. But if you win in a district that Trump won, that's a bigger deal. Now, one of those races is Minnesota 8, which is a democratically held Trump district, and the Democrat Joe Radinovich is running on a single player platform, and he's not doing very well right now. So if Kara Eastman wins and Radinovich loses, a pro single payer person can say, so what up, Radinovich? Kara Eastman proves you can win by doing this. If Eastman loses and Radinovich loses, and Gillum and O'Rourke, who've both been somewhat single payer, if they all lose, that's an argument like, look, that is just a loser in a Trump won district. That's not the way to go.
I don't know about you, Bill, but it feels now. Of course, the last day has been crazy, and who knows where that will take us. But up until recently, at least the last couple of weeks, I've kind of felt like it's a Republican. I feel like the energy feels like it's much more pro-Republican going into the midterms than I would have ever imagined it. And I think Trump, with his rallies and with his ability to control the message and this caravan, and the Kavanaugh. I mean, I do think the Kavanaugh effect is important. You were talking about how we've kind of forgotten about it and it's been eclipsed, and I think that's true. But I think the Kavanaugh moment was kind of a catalyst and a turning point. And I do think since the Kavanaugh moment, it's felt more. I'll put it to you this way: it hasn't felt like '06 or whatever, or 10, or I mean, well, 10 is the wrong one. It hasn't felt like '06. It hasn't felt like a Democratic wave, even though I think all the evidence would have supported that this year should be that. And again, I guess if I'm betting, I still bet that Democrats will take the House, but it doesn't really feel like there's a ton of Democratic energy right now.
Well, I think it's overstating it. I think there's certainly evidence that Republicans have been re-energized in the past couple of weeks. I don't think Democrats are retreating. I mean, I think there's still very intense energy. The question is the energy amongst the activist base? I mean, you got people who are pouring into swing areas from other places. That's certainly happening, I think, at a very robust clip.
You mean to vote or to volunteer?
To volunteer. Okay. The question, can that translate into actual votes from people who may not be as wired in to our politics, who don't live and breathe politics every day? There's still plenty of races where Democrats are doing well where they would not normally do well. One race that I mentioned in my article, and by the way, I remember the third single-payer race I was thinking about in a Trump district, which is Randy Bryce, Iron Stash in Wisconsin won. Now, that's a complicated race because he's also being hit hard for his arrest record. Is an ad featuring his brother attacking him because his brother's a police officer. He calls his brother anti-cop.
Yeah.
So if he loses, you don't necessarily would blame single payer for it.
Right. And by the way, part of a larger trend of we've seen multiple talk about a civil war pitting brother against brother.
Yeah.
We have seen multiple ads this election cycle where siblings and parents are running ads against.
Well, the ad against Paul Gosar in Arizona got a lot of attention because there was like 6 siblings and there was a reveal at the end.
But I think his mom took his side. I think.
Well, that's right. But that's not considered a swing race. The ad in Wisconsin won from Bryce's brother is much more potentially impactful because there was a poll showing there was a dead heat. And if it ends up not being a dead heat, I mean that ad it resonated. It would Randy had to respond to it in debates. Randy's mom spoke up saying I hate that this is what this is doing to my family. So that's more relevant, I think. And it's tough for the single payer advocates who thought Bryce would be the quintessential working man hero to carry their cause because of the viral videos that he had in the primary, and he got all this money before people knew about his arrest record, his delinquent child support, and the occasional errant tweet, and now he's having to defend himself on that. I mean, he could still win. I'm not saying he can't win.
And he ended up beating out a liberal school teacher or something.
A school member who was also for single payer. So it's not like it wasn't an ideological dispute between the two of them. But they had someone with less baggage they could have turned to, but he got such a headwind from the viral videos that she never could catch up. Even though I thought she did pretty well considering the disadvantage she was at. Kara Eastman of the three, is sort of the cleanest. I mean, Radinovich doesn't have any kind of scandal or anything, but he's just having a tougher race. But the point I was making, many articles ago, that there are not as many single-payer warriors in red areas that the left would like. You end up stuck with people who have imperfect records. But to get back to where
I'm happy to be stuck with you, as Huey Lewis might say.
We go to the enthusiasm question. I do think that there are a lot of people running who have intimated in the primaries they're open to single payer. who would say Medicare for all is where we need to be headed. But that's going to take a long time, and here are the things we should do in the interim. There's a bunch of candidates in that bucket, as well as candidates who steer clear of single payer and say we need to improve an ACA. And a lot of those folks are for public option, and there's the folks who are just say single payer now. I don't see any ad from a Democrat that says bluntly, I am for single payer and here is why. I mean, even Kara Eastman's ad says, I'm for affordable health care for all. She defends it in debates. It's not like she's not running away from the issue, but she's not leading with it in quite the way you might expect. And the broader theme from Democrats, regardless of where they stand, is this Republican voted against protection of pre-existing conditions. I mean, that is the most common theme in Republican ads. So my point here is, I think the enthusiasm for the left is there, but they see a necessity to be on attack mode, to go after the incumbent, to go after Washington, to go after people who are in the pocket of special interest, much more so than they're running on, here is my 10-point plan for what to do next. They'll say what they're for in the ads, but in very generic and vague terms. So I think there's enthusiasm there, but they definitely want to focus on the Republican weakness more than they want to focus on Democratic strength.
Well, I think that so if we were doing, I guess two things that could spice up this show a little bit. One, I really wish I'd made an actual Mettometer or a Trumpometer. Because, there were times where he was Reaganing and then times where he's Nixoning, it would have been huge shifts in, in Trumpism. And then the second thing is, I guess we have 2 weeks, but I think we should probably do an embarrassing predictions where we go state by state, at least in the Senate, and go on the record with, because the one thing I think that we need more of in the media is horse race sort of commentary. I think we probably need more speculation, a little more salacious talk. And I know people come here to the DMZ for that. So maybe in 2 weeks at the end, after we've had our deep substantive discussion, we could indulge ourselves in some predictions. I'll throw it out there to the commenters if they would like to see Bill, because I know Bill has a great track record of predicting elections.
Well, I don't want to go. I'll say my gut right now. I'm not going to go race by race, but I'm with conventional wisdom, which is Democrats take the House, and Republicans take the Senate, and that speaks to what you're saying, that there is this renewed Republican enthusiasm, but it's the Republicans, it's the Senate races that have the bigger Republican tilt.
Yeah.
It may mean that Democrats don't have an enormously successful day on the House side, but they don't need to do that well to take the House. Yeah. There are enough. They can't do it solely on Clinton won districts, but Clinton won districts get them a good part of the way there. And there are other races. Here's where I was trying to go in our last exchange. Florida 15 is a race that's a very Republican district that polling is showing a dead heat, that people are kind of surprised by. That's as close as it was, and I believe it's an open district, so they have two candidates who are not super well known, and that's helping the Democrat get a toehold. There was a Clinton won district, Florida 26, which is Carlos Cabrillo. So people thought he was a very strong Republican. He had a very moderate line, a good bond with his district. And the New York Times live poll just showed the Democrat up by 1 point there. On the other side of the ideological line, South Dakota governor's race. Here's one that no one thought the Democrat would have even a stone's throw chance in. Kristi Noem, already a statewide political figure, being the lone House member. But she won kind of a hard-fought primary. Her opponent has not endorsed her. The Republican opponent, who's the state attorney general, has not endorsed her yet. And the Democrat is not only the state Senate minority leader, he is a paralyzed former rodeo competitor. He got paralyzed in a rodeo accident, and he still rides. And he's running as a quote unquote pro-gun fiscal conservative, and he can run as a South Dakotan. You always see him in his cowboy hat, and run against this creature from Washington and Kristi Noem. And the first poll just came out in that race. That was a dead heat poll. So there are other races where you see Republicans doing better than expected. So I'm not saying those races don't exist, but it's not all in one direction, which is why I think the Democrats still have a very good chance of still taking the House. And netting in governor's races too.
Oh yeah, that's so funny. Governor's races don't really get talked about much at all, but very important. And then of course the upcoming redistricting, state legislative stuff.
Well, I mean, the governor's races have some possible residual effect with the state legislative chambers.
Right.
So, the Larry Sabato's Crystal Ball site said Democrats are poised to take over some state legislative chambers, not as many as you might expect based on past patterns of pendulum swings, but they should net some. And of course, the big ball game is 2020. I mean, that's when you really want to. Those legislatures that will decide on the new lines. And if Democrats can win in governor's races, that shows some momentum on the down ballot in those states as well. And there are several Republican states. I mean, some that are almost locks. I mean, almost surely Democrats win Michigan. Very good chance of winning Wisconsin. Decent chance of winning Iowa as well as South Dakota. And if they can,
what's your theory on that? Now, this is the Rust Belt, the industrial Midwest. Donald Trump performed very well there. Why would it be that Republicans are not?
I mean, this is also true in the Senate races. Sherrod Brown, Tammy Baldwin, Debbie Stabenow, these folks are not having a problem. Bob Casey not having a problem. The other folks, McCaskill, Donnelly, Heitkamp, they're having problems, but those are redder states in the first place.
And they're also not really Rust Belt states. I mean, they're not the
Rust Belt / Plains, industrial Midwest, upper Midwest, if I'm speaking more, and also Minnesota, Klobuchar is doing fine. Tina Smith will probably win, but it's a bit closer than you might think in some polling.
But I'm specifically interested in some people don't like it when I say Rust Belt, but that's a specific thing, right? I mean, those were states that feel like they've been left behind by America because of globalization or automation. And I'm talking, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, those states, Michigan. I think all those states were Trump states, and now I think all those states, Democrats seem to be doing pretty well there. Why is that?
I mean, I think a common interpretation is that Hillary was uniquely bad for those states, that these aren't states that really haven't gone far right. And once you get a non-Hillary person in there, that person does well. I think that's a little too pat. That doesn't explain, why Scott Walker won, 3 times in a row. Doesn't explain why.
But he's not doing great now, is he?
Well, not now, but
he's not doing great now.
You can't say Wisconsin was naturally Democratic when the fact is Michigan had a Republican governor before.
What is it about Hillary specifically that was bad? And
I do think Hillary was not perfectly situated for those states. She is, she's from the Midwest initially, but she was seen as too close to Wall Street and too close to the establishment. I think my personal opinion is, these are places that are very skeptical of the establishment in Washington. And even if it wasn't Hillary, someone trying to run as a third Obama term was going to have a hard time. And maybe Bernie wouldn't have been that person, but it's still hard to not run as a third Democratic term when you had a Democratic president for 2 terms. Even a Bernie wasn't going to go saying everything Obama did was terrible.
Henry Olsen, who's a conservative, populist, think tank intellectual, believes that the problem is that that these Republicans running in this area are just not Trumpy enough. That they're basically, the reason they're not performing as well as Trump is, that they're running as normal Republicans. That they haven't become.
I don't feel it's true in the case of Wisconsin. Walker is pretty hard right, and the Senate candidate, Leah Vukmir, has been pretty hard right. I don't think she's a soft establishment Republican. And I thought the Michigan guy, the Republican who got the nomination, I can't say I've watched his ads lately, so forgive me if this is not correct, but he's the Trump pick, right? The guy who lost that primary gave this, sad concession speech on video where he's like, well, I could be mixing up the Senate race and the governor's race. So I believe there was a Michigan Republican that said, hey, what are you going to do? Trump didn't pick me. It's Trump's party. That's the way it goes. And I think the Ohio Senate candidate's pretty hard right. The Iowa governor's race, I think the incumbent governor is pretty establishment, Reynolds. So I don't know if that's sufficient an explanation. And I think the main thing is this is an electorate that is dissatisfied in general and is very quick to blame whoever is in charge,
that's
Republican or Democrat.
Yeah.
Now,
that's really interesting.
Now, granted, Sherrod Brown, Debbie Stabenow, Terry Baldwin are incumbents, but they can still pivot against the Republicans in charge and not take ownership for whatever bad is going on in the world. And I believe they all have ads where they say, "Look at what I've done. I've done things to fight against this. I've done things to keep jobs in our state, and show that I'm not like these other Washington folks who are out to get us." So that they're doing a good job of showing I'm siding with you against Washington.
Yeah, I think that's the best. That's why people tune into this, Bill, or those kind of insights that you deliver on a weekly basis.
We try. So before we head out, we probably should say something about what's going on with the pipe bomb scare. Now, you've noted that there's increased Republican enthusiasm because it's Kavanaugh, because of the caravan, or Democratic missteps. Does this totally change that equation? Where people say, people like you, Matt Lewis, if I may say, who are saying that the Democratic mobs are out of control and the Republicans need to push back on this.
I said, let's be consistent. Let's be for civility consistently, and let's be against incivility. I'm against the mob on both sides.
You're making a both sides argument.
I am. And I think Donald Trump undermined by the Charlottesville thing, both sides. Now you can't say both sides anymore. Just he's actually done a disservice to those of us who do believe that a mob.
Both-siderism.
Well, but sometimes both-siderism's right. Sometimes it's like whataboutism or what. I mean, sometimes it's a trick or a technique to muddy the waters, and sometimes it's actually correct.
But it's common on the left to say both sides is false equivalency, and now here's a classic example. You're going to be equivalently mad about a couple people who've heckled a politician in a restaurant versus a pipe bomb scare. There's no equivalency there.
Steve Scalise being gunned down. I mean, that's a better equivalency. A Republican congressman shot by a Bernie Sanders supporter. I mean, my point is, I do believe that whether it's the horrible rhetoric of Donald Trump, where he calls us the enemy of the people, or whether it's people chasing Ted Cruz out of a restaurant, these things all fit somewhere on a spectrum of incivility. And I do think at some point they contribute to a toxic environment. Now, there's different levels, but I think that all of them are part of the same unfortunate phenomenon.
But in the case of the congressional ball game shooting, which was conducted by a Bernie Sanders supporter, you can't draw a line between Bernie Sanders' rhetoric and the shooter. Bernie doesn't speak in violent rhetoric. He's very populist in the sense that he has an us versus them framework for everything.
Right.
But that's a lot different than Donald Trump saying, let's all praise Gianforte for body slamming a journalist. And if there's a protester in our midst of the rally, knock the crap out of him and I'll cover your legal costs. Bernie doesn't do stuff like that. So there's been this constant stream of agitation from Trump to say these Democratic liberal politicians, these members of the media, they're the enemy of the people, and that you should respond to them in violent means. Now, of course,
sure.
I
agree. Look, I condemn what Donald Trump has done, and I think it is entirely possible that somebody is if it hasn't happened already, could take their cues. Somebody who just watches cable news all day and listens to what the president tells them. It's incredibly scary. I think he has a responsibility, especially the president has a responsibility to unite us and to calm things down. And instead, he is inciting anger and division. Like, there's no doubt about that. But Eric Holder says when they go low, we kick them. And
but he immediately said, "I'm not talking about being violent."
Oh, I know. I know that. I know that, but that's not the soundbite, right?
Well, I know, and I criticized it. I said it was a dumb soundbite. But he didn't even see the caveat wasn't made after the criticism. He made the caveat in real time. And same with the Hillary Clinton's incivility comment. She made very clearly she wasn't talking about violence or talking about even lying. She was talking about being tough on Donald Trump rhetorically. And there's a
plenty
huge
of people like
difference between
Maxine Waters and Maxine Waters and just other kind of like liberal voices who say like, don't give these people a moment's rest. Hound them. They don't deserve to be out in public. That could lead to something bad too.
Well, the Waters comment, I think, is the most. On the spectrum, that was the most pointed comment made by a Democratic office holder. But I want to give it a little bit of context. So this was when the news of the child separations was dominant in the media, and Democrats were, and many and non-Democrats rightly outraged. The federal government is separating children from families, which is horrific. And so she was saying, when you see members of the Trump cabinet in public, you get in their face. Right. You go to the restaurants. You say you're not welcome here.
You know what?
Hold on. All
right.
And there are people who are doing that. They have followed Maxine Waters' lead, and they've gone to restaurants and they heckle them, and in some cases, actively chase them out of the restaurant. That has happened. And if you say that is no, I think that is one.
But Bill, I think abortion is murder, especially like partial birth abortion, late-term abortion, okay? And by the way, I was against family separation. But to me, the abortion issue is a matter of life and death. I think I could make a much more compelling argument that if I believe that I have a moral responsibility whenever I see a Democratic politician to confront them and to get in their face and to hound them out. And I should get a bunch of my pro-life friends, and we should go make their lives uncomfortable.
People do that. People go outside abortion clinics and hound people going to abortion clinics.
Are different than following somebody into a restaurant. But I'm not saying it's good either. I don't do that. I don't like that. And I guess my point is, this is not good. We should not be encouraging this. Well, because it leads to, remember Dr. Tiller in Kansas?
Yes.
Horrible, right?
Yes.
Well, I think that we need to tone things down. And I think that, again, if you want to talk about both-siderism, I am advocating it right here, that we both need to do that.
If you want to argue that, encouraging heckling and rhetorical confrontation is bad because it may lead to one or two, lone wolves doing something worse than that. I mean, I'm not saying I totally agree with that, but I understand the argument. But I think it should be a distinction should be made between encouraging that kind of disruption, because there is a long history of civil disobedience that is rooted in the notion that if something is a moral outrage, that you need to make the lives of the people doing that outrage uncomfortable so they will make political concessions. And there are examples of that working as intended, most notably the civil rights movement, Martin
How
Luther
do you
King,
think the
Rosa
media
Parks.
would cover it? How do you think the media would cover it if we decided, I'm not going to name any names here because I don't want to spark anything, but do you pick a mainstream media journalist who has been the most controversial in terms of liberal bias or calling Trump a racist or whatever? What if we now, I'm taking off my media hat, I'm putting on my right-winger hat here. What if we decided to make that person's life uncomfortable wherever they went? Restaurant, movie, dinner with the family. We're going to follow a reporter around and do that. How would that be perceived by, I'll put my media hat back on now. I would think it's horrific and horrible and wrong.
Well, the political logic behind that kind of confrontation, I talked about this in my last Real Clear Politics article. It's most clearly articulated by Saul Alinksy in Rules for Radicals. And Alinksy argues that you pick your target, you freeze your target, you polarize your target, you ignore the whining from goody-goody liberals who say you're being unfair and that the problems were complicated than that, and you make that one person's life miserable.
Right.
Or in some cases, a larger, one example he mentions, which he says worked, was there was commitments made by the city of Chicago to help people in low-income neighborhoods. Activists felt they weren't living up to their commitments, so they leaked plans to occupy the bathroom stalls of O'Hare Airport, so nobody in O'Hare could use the bathrooms. And they would tie up, all air traffic. It's a main hub. You tie up all this air traffic across the country. Then the political elite says, whoa, let's talk. Everything's going to be fine here. You don't have to go do that. We're going to live to our commitments. And they says that worked as intended. And they didn't even actually have to do the occupation because they got the political establishment to opt to. So the argument is, in Alinksy, that you make your opponent confused and fearful, so you can bring them to the negotiating table and get concessions. So that's the point. Now, and if you can do
Saul
that,
Saul Alinksy was a horrible person and advocated a horrible.
Well, whatever you have to say about his, political objectives, there are times when that model of activism has worked and times where it has not. But no one would say Rosa Parks was a bad person for a boycott, for breaking law and boycotting, and encouraging, all of Montgomery, Metro Montgomery, to boycott the buses and hurt the city's economic situation.
No, but I don't think Alinskyism or whatever is about. I mean, when I think of Alinksy, I don't think of civil disobedience. I think the ends justify the means. But that, to me, is his defining, message. But
his message, I think if you read the book, I think that's largely true. But that doesn't. But he wasn't saying, and just by the means, so go kill a bunch of people.
Yeah.
He was saying, do things that work. So I don't think Alinksy would be very impressed with Maxine Waters right now, because they're not freezing their target and actually making these people uncomfortable. Republicans are gleeful when they get heckled in a restaurant because they take the clips and put them in ads and say, let's use this to help our side.
Well, keep in mind, too, technology's changed it. We have video, Twitter, people are being captured on video. Cruz maybe even looks like a victim. Fox News didn't used to exist. Fox News is now playing the video. Donald Trump is... I'm guessing Saul Alinksy never envisioned Donald Trump being president, and so, the tactics that may have worked in an era before Twitter, before cable news, before Donald Trump may not work the same way today either.
Well, that may be, and Alinksy would say, like he says in the book, a tactic that goes on for too long becomes a drag. It was always about changing tactics. When something, you don't just flog the same thing over and over again because it worked before. If it stops working, you do something else. So he would not say, making this person's life uncomfortable worked in 1972, you should keep doing it. He would never say that. So my argument against what Maxine Waters says was, I think she advocates something that wasn't strategically smart, but it's hard for the left to let go of it because there is a long history of succeeding when making the lives of people in power uncomfortable. And so I think you can argue that kind of confrontation might have tragic unintended consequences, but the act in and of itself, to say someone should be made uncomfortable because they're doing something morally bad and we want them to stop. So your argument is, what if you said that about a reporter? If you couldn't get the broader public to get behind you on your overarching goal, well, then you'd look like a big jerk doing that. And if people felt, you know what, I'm really sad about families being separated from their children, but don't be mean to Ted Cruz in a restaurant. If it's not achieving your goal,
you're basically saying let the free market work it out, do it, and then if there's a backlash, don't do it. I'm saying it should be right or wrong. It's not whether or not it works. Is it right and healthy and good for America to behave this way? To me, that's my criteria, not whether or not it succeeds in pushing Ted Cruz to change his vote.
Well, I don't go around heckling people in restaurants. That's not how I do things. That's not how I think things are right and proper and work best. But I also can't say it's never worked in history, and therefore you're crazy to propose something like that.
But let's just concede that it does work. Let's assume it works. Is it? To me, I would still argue it's bad for America. It's not who we are. It's not who we should be.
Well, American politics has never been squeaky clean. There's always decisions that politicians and activists have to make as far as least worst in a whole realm of situations. And so for something like abject segregation, people that had gone on for 100 years after slavery before then, people understandably said, you know what, whatever, however sad it makes people feel that we're being confrontational, so what? That problem pales in comparison to the outrage that I'm trying to rectify. And I think you could understand why Democrats would say that in the wake of children being separated from families, in the wake of that moment, it seemed like making people's lives uncomfortable to help reunite families was a perfectly reasonable trade-off. Now, I argue that strategy has gotten out of hand to a degree, but what's happened on the Republican side with Trump advocating... I'll
say this. We have had an extended... we obviously lived through 9/11, and there's been a lot of crazy stuff that's happened, but in terms of political violence, I mean, the bombings that happened in the 1970s, like the Weather Underground, things like that, assassination attempts. I mean, I guess the last 1981, Reagan, there's the attempt on Reagan's life. We have very much skirted that by and large. I mean, there have been things that have happened, right? I mean, including Steve Scalise. But I do fear that these bombs didn't work. I don't know why, but it's not crazy to think that something real is actually going to happen. And when it does happen, I think that to an extent, we are all, culpable in terms of the environment that we create, and that includes the media and politicians and Trump. All of it.
So just to go back,
we're ginning up controversy and hatred and division.
So to go back, just to close out and get back to our wheelhouse, which is crude, soulless political analysis, is the fact that these pipe bomb incidents occurred, and even though Trump did actively encourage bombing people, he is certainly engaged in violent rhetoric. Does that change the political equation for Election Day? All the things you've talked about, that we've talked about as far as Republican increased enthusiasm.
Well, I just spent 20 minutes dodging that question.
I mean, you've said in the past, I don't disagree with you, that Democrats were already energized
Yeah.
So any additional energizing on the right is reducing the gap of enthusiasm. But are there people in the middle? Are there soft Republicans or soft independents who are going to look at this and say, you know what? This isn't a both sides situation. One side is worse here, and we need to deliver a check on that because this is getting out of hand.
I mean, I think the question, it's just impossible to answer, right? I mean, is this it, or is there another bomb? Well, a week from now or 2 weeks from now. Like, let's assume that this is it. You know, good Lord willing, this happened and it doesn't happen again. If that's the case, assuming that it's over, this is going to be a distant memory in 2 weeks. Think about all the things that have happened in the last 2 weeks. It's insane how fast the news cycles are, how much crazy things happen in the controversy, and the media is going to chase the next big story, right?
I think that's
again, like in the past few weeks, we've had Kavanaugh, Khashoggi, caravans, and now the bombing or the attempted bombing.
People thought 2 weeks ago that the Kavanaugh bump would ride the whole month.
Sure, yeah.
And now we have a bunch of things that are pulling the electorate in opposite directions. And that might be where we go from the next 2 weeks. It's just you have things that are ginning up the left and ginning up the right at the same time. But this is not going to be an orchestrated narrative on one side of things. I would guess between now and election day. But
some people think it is orchestrated. I mean, there have been the false flag allegations out there.
Right.
So, but I generally think you're right. We live in crazy times, and I think that unless there are more attempts, that this will not be. When people walk into the polls on election day, what issue will be dominating their heads that day? Now, I guess the one caveat here is early voting, right? Which has begun, like in Texas. I think early voting has already started like on Monday, maybe. I think it was Monday. So,
and Nevada too.
So it may be impacting people more, who are voting right now. So it's complicated.
All right, gonna leave it on that note. What do you got to plug, Matt Lewis?
Help support the podcast, man. Like, I've been talking about how I think that our society, whether it's Twitter or cable news, is often part of the problem. There are good things out there that are part of the solution, where people have civilized conversations, and you can support my podcast at patreon.com/Matt Lewis, where we have these kind of talks.
And if you liked Matt's conversation with Washington Post Greg Sargent, author of An Uncivil War, you can get more of Greg Sargent on my podcast,
yes.
New Books in Politics. That just went up this morning. And it's been a really great month for New Books in Politics. Steve Kornacki, David Petrusha, and also, as I mentioned last week, Michael Koncewitz. They said no to Nixon. Really great conversations, all at the New Books Network. Check out my Politico article, the 15 races that will determine how Democrats approach 2020. And I guess we have one more pre-election show next week.
Yeah, so let us know if you want us to engage in rank punditry and wildly premature speculation and actually go through the states, or just see what happens, because heaven knows will be something to talk about.
It'll be for entertainment purposes only, no wagering.
Although if other people want to bet on us, that does happen in the stock market. You could bet on someone else's bet, so you can do that.
All right, till next week.
All right, see you guys.